The new LinkedIn Hiring Pro can't undo your last hire. The empty seat. Who was actually just that, an empty chair in your office because you couldn't find someone to fill it. So it just sat there costing you money with all its fancy ergonomic features. But LinkedIn Hiring Pro can make it easy to fill that seat with the right candidate, with nearly 60% of businesses finding someone to interview in the first week alone. Hire right the first time with LinkedIn Hiring Pro. Post a free job today at linkedin.com/quality.
Hey, it's Bill from the Bill Simmons podcast. FIFA World Cup 26 fans, listen up. Is the official beer sponsor of the FIFA World Cup 26. Michelob Ultra is giving away $1 million worth of FIFA World Cup 26 tickets and prizes. Enter now at michelobultra.com/superior access/FIFA World Cup 26. Michelob Ultra FIFA World Cup 26 superior access. No purchase necessary. Open U.S. residents 21 plus begins on December 1st, 2025. Ends on July 31st, 2026. Multiple entry periods. Visit www.michelobultra.com/superior access/FIFA World Cup 26 for free entry deadlines, prizes, and details.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this feature edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. This is the second in a series of our Hunt Fish 250, a celebration of 250 years of America and our sporting and conservation heritage and traditions. On this episode, we're welcoming in our president and CEO, Jeff Crane, Senior Vice President Taylor Schmitz, who's a fan favorite of the show. And we are going to cover modern legislative wins. A lot of this stuff we've talked about over the last few seasons, and you're going to hear from two of the foremost experts. Jeff, with his many years with CSF, can talk about where we've been, where we've gotten to, and then Taylor more recently. And you got, like I said, you guys have heard him so much on the program talk about all the great wins here over the last few years when a lot of stuff does not get done in Washington. Our issues matter and do get done. So we're going to hear from both of them on that. Without further ado, let's do it. Jeff, Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Fred. Glad to be with you again.
Fred, always good to be on the podcast.
No doubt. We're going to have to start sending out special requests for autographs for Taylor.
That works.
So yeah, modern legislative wins that are keeping us in the game. We got a history lesson on episode 1 of the Hunt Fish 250 series from Simon Roosevelt and James Cummins. It was fantastic. Great lessons in that history, bringing us current. So access always being one of the big conversations we're having, state level, federal level, and that means a whole bunch of different things. The policy that protects it. Jeff, I want to start with you because you've been at this for a number of years. Hit on some of the highlights, some of the big ticket items that have gotten us through and evolved conservation, our efforts, the funding that keeps it going, and that have led to some of the more evolved pieces of policy.
Okay, sure. Starting at really a high level, Fred, I think for the Congressional Sportsmen Foundation, when I started in 2002, we were focused only on federal, primarily federal legislative policy, but I think probably one of the great strategic decisions that the board and I made at the time was to think about the states and the fact that most wildlife management decisions are made at the state level, including access, especially east of the Mississippi River, where there's a lot more private lands. But when we started to build what is now the NAS program and start working and dedicating resources and people to cover all 50 states, that was a force multiplier in a huge way to addressing proactively and getting out in front of policy issues and including a lot of access, whether it was Sunday hunting, no net loss, opportunities, some of the fisheries things that we worked on over the years. So I think from a very high standpoint, that decision to really expand our reach and go out and create the NAS network and then the Governor's Sportsmen's Caucus in 2009 has been a really wise, looking back on it, a wise direction, and has really enhanced our ability to be the advocates that we are for sportsmen and women.
In the early days of the organization, can you talk about some of the bigger premier pieces of legislation that really took on a challenge, really engaged the CSC and put that model to work, and then that helped catapult the state program and really getting all 50 states on board and seeing the value in such an organization?
Without getting into too much detail and getting lost, one that particularly stands out to me in 2005 with the federal reauthorization of the highway bill, the excise tax for motorboat fuel and sport fishing equipment is tied to the highway bill because of the fuel tax. And until 2005, the Wallet Bro only was getting us about 14.3 or so of the 18.3 cents per gallon. So we were roughly coming out about a nickel short, and working with then chairman of the House Transportation Committee, a CSC past chairman, an active member of the caucus when he was still in Congress and still alive, Don Young, and we went to him during the conference and said, "We're getting shortchanged by this. This is important funding for boat ramps, for aquatic species, invasive species, for sport fish restoration, just really critical things." And he was able to get us the full 18.3 cents. And I think if I remember the math quite right, it was about $120 million a year additional money coming into the Dingle Johnson Wallop Bros sport fish restoration and boat safety programs. So you do that over the last 20 years, that's billions of dollars. And having a direct hand in that thing, because I just happened to have been with Don Young in Africa in August, and this happened in September, was pretty fortuitous. And feel pretty good about what kind of impact that has had and what CSF was able to deliver. And like I said, there are access components to that, but that was a particularly big one from the early days that I recall.
Taylor, I'll throw it to you. More currently, we've had a lot of great wins at the federal level, especially since I've come onto the team and we've started this program and reported on many of them. Um, Talk about some of the more marquee ones that have passed recently, gotten to a president's desk and signed, and things we're currently working on that will have a great impact.
Yeah, thanks, Fred, for that question. I'll start off with one that I think checks two boxes, both of those boxes there, and that is the Great American Outdoors Act in 2020. And that was a really significant bill that not only permanently funded what's known as the Land and Water Conservation Fund to provide access and wildlife habitat across the country. And as a testament to the success of LWCF, it's actually completed a conservation or an access project in every single county in the country. And I'm not aware of any other program that can claim that degree of success. So we were really excited to see that program permanently funded through the Great American Outdoors Act. But uniquely to the Great American Outdoors Act, the bill provided $9.5 billion to restore degraded infrastructure on our federal public lands. Not just your visitors' facilities and your restrooms, but roads, bridges, trailheads, etc., so we can better access our federal public lands. And while the bulk of that money did go to the National Park Service, something that is not necessarily the primary focus area of CSF because you can't hunt in national parks, but you can fish there. We are really excited to see that bill provide $3 billion for non-park service agencies. So things like the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where we as hunters and as anglers and recreational shooters get out and enjoy these federal public lands. And why that one is really significant is it really kind of came to fruition in late March 2020 and was signed into law in August 2020. So when at a point when there's, arguably unmatched unrest across the world and here in the United States with the pandemic and what have you, we are able to work with, members of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, the administration, to get a monumental bill across the finish line. And I think that's just very telling of where sportsmen's issues and conservation and access really reside in the priority list for members of Congress, that all these other things going on at that point in time, they were able to get this monumental bill across the finish line, and really a great win for us at CSF. But we are working right now as we speak on reauthorizing that maintenance backlog piece of the Great American Outdoors Act. So that bill only provided authorization for 5 years. That has since lapsed, and we're working on reauthorizing that right now with our champions in Congress as we speak. But I would say in the last 10 years or so, that is probably the biggest piece of legislation, true sportsman's piece of legislation and public access and conservation to pass the United States Congress.
More recently, and I want to make sure, I mean, most of the audience understands this, but for new listeners, it sounds like a lot of this stuff is hunting centric, and we do have a lot of great wins in the fishery side. To that end, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor, MAP Waters Act, MAP Oceans Act, have worked through, and when we talk about access, and evolution of access, the modernization of technology for anglers to have these resources to know local regulations, what you can and can't do on the water, where to go, how to navigate, especially on the marine side. These are great access wins that, sometimes might get overlooked because of a news cycle, but you and the team and partners had a very big hand. Chris Horton, senior director of fisheries, just really working relationships and collaborating there on the Hill to get some of these victories across the line, and done so in a bipartisan way, which others can't say they can do.
Yeah, that's right, Fred. And you mentioned the Map Waters Act. That was a bill that got signed into law within the last year or so, that would essentially digitize and modernize all public water mapping information. So you know where the boat ramps are on your smartphone, size restrictions, whether you can run a gas engine on that or if it has to be electric, fishing regulations. All of this information would now be available on your smartphone or whatever computer you use. But importantly, it'd be available in one single database. So there's no longer having to go to 5, 7 different federal agency websites or government websites to track down this information. And I'll give you a real example of how this would work out, at least in our minds, as we're working with the federal agencies to implement this. I was duck hunting over the holidays on a federal piece of property, and we were running the boat, picked up the decoys, and we're running the boat back to the ramp at night, and we're using Onyx on our phone and to help navigate as we're running, a Q beam to get across the shoreline. We're talking to ourselves, hey man, wouldn't it be great to have, if you could have on your phone, to see where all the channel markers were at, right? If you're running a bigger bill or bigger boat, so you have all that information. So that bill got sent into law. That is just for what I would classify as federal public water freshwater agencies. And so we took that same concept and applied it to saltwater federal agencies, primarily the U.S. Commerce Department and NOAA. And we are working to get that bill across the finish line right now. That would require NOAA to digitize and modernize all their saltwater mapping information. And, at a time when access is arguably more and more challenging for sportsmen and women to find, it's really important for us to find ways to modernize this information. And finding access points is not conducted the same way that it was done 30, 40, 50 years ago when you're going to an agency and pulling up public maps. It's very, very different right now. And the way that people find that information is very different. So it's important for us as a community to get with the times and make this a little bit easier for folks.
And staying with the marine line of thought here too, at the state level, we've seen, as it concerns red snapper, the Gulf states really kind of own their own technology and systems and get a better understanding of catch what's out there, actual fish populations, instead of painting with broad strokes. And they've been very successful at it, to the point that this year we saw Florida finally open up because of the data collection and moving up the Atlantic side of the Southeast, those states bringing in that surveying to their local anglers and providing more access. You went from a 1-day season for the last couple of years, and now it's wide open, which is fantastic. And again, evolving with the times.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also important to recognize that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. We, and specifically Chris Horton, our senior director of fisheries policy, worked for years and years and years to get the federal government to accept state data in the Gulf. And we were able to do that. They've accepted that data. And because of that, we went from roughly a 3 day red snapper season in the Gulf for most states to upwards of 120 days, depending on, various numbers and what have you. And this is solely because Chris was dedicated to and was was willing to not let his frustrations get in the way of years and years of work to work with our federal agency partners to accept that state data. So we demonstrated success in the Gulf nearly a decade ago, close to a decade ago. And now we've been able to apply that same concept to the South Atlantic for red snapper. And hopefully, once we get through some of these final details, we'll be able to see some of the significant results and increases and expansion for opportunities for South Atlantic anglers. But again, it goes back to the fact that this stuff takes time, but that's why we're headquartered here in DC. So we can walk the halls of Congress. We can work with our federal agency partners and continue the fight for sportsmen and women here in DC.
Jeff, I got to imagine as you were coming up as a young man, a young professional, and you were in the outdoors, it didn't really occur to people that hunting and fishing were not a right. I would guess it was very just a matter of fact, and that people just accepted that. And today, when our team and in-state partners are working on right to hunt and fish language to amend state constitutions, it does boggle some minds. And people still today in 2026 think, oh, don't you already have that right? And in fact, we do not. And again, going from like when you were a young person to where we are now, did you ever think that we would be at a point when we had to defend that and in such a challenging way? 24 out of 50 states have put this into their state constitutions, but we still got a road to hoe, and we're doing so as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot more of a connection to people, to the land, and just a different attitude about hunting, and in particular fishing also, but really about hunting. And candidly, the really rabid anti hunting, anti fishing kind of groups had not started back in the 60s and 70s. And so looking back on that, and you think at the time, no, you would have never thought that we would be having the battles that we have right now. And thankfully CSF is here to be that tip of the spear, to lead the way, and the push on the constitutional rights to hunt and fish is certainly, sorry, constitutional right to hunt and fish is certainly something that is taking on an increasing importance, and proud of the fact that we've gotten it up to 24 with Florida, and when we got Florida past it, but we worked heavily on it in 2024, and we're continuing, to your point, to try to reach out and do it state by state and try to knock down, like we did building our state program, just keep knocking the states down, because it's very clear. You look at Oregon and places like that we've got a real threat, that is raising the question whether we should be allowed as Americans to hunt on our own lands and in our own state, and fish as well in Oregon. So it's critically important that we stay with the times, which we do, okay, stay on top of the trends. But no, if I look back, there's been some great success stories in the last 50 or so years, that I've been enjoying the outdoors, and proud of those. But yeah, we would have never thought that we would have had the challenges, to the point where a state was considering trying to ban all hunting and fishing.
Yeah, and as we're recording this, we have seems like a very real chance at moving that needle uh, on the other side of 25 with Delaware and Colorado now in play. And listeners can go back and check that episode out with Dan Gates and IOTR as well, talking about that effort that is upon us. So yeah, we got some opportunities ahead of us. In the 20 or so minutes we've been talking, I'm thinking about access and both of your experiences. And Jeff, I don't mean to keep going back in time, but I can't help but think about Pittman Robinson and the theme of access, and the access back then was recovering healthy herds, healthy flocks, um, healthy waterways, just the access to the resources, um, and where we've come so far with that almost 90 years down the road, we do have this healthy ecosystems that are there, but it requires another evolution of management. And as we have built out our forestry expertise on the team, we've really been able to lean into forest management. Again, this is something that, you know, back when I was a kid, you look at Smokey the Bear, Woodsy the Owl, all these campaigns that came about, the Lorax not wanting to cut trees, and all this marketing that went against that. And what we've found, the science over time, and this builds into the access part of this, is healthy forests allow for the perpetuation of healthy flocks and healthy herds, which in turn gives sportsmen and women and all the other users access to these wonderful places. That does not happen without sound policy at the state and federal level.
100%, and that's our reason for CSF existing, is to continue to educate and inform the policymakers both here in Washington and at the states as to what the actual facts are, what the real issue is at hand, what the motivation potentially is for the other side on some of this stuff. And as was we well know, a lot of times it's about money, and it's really not about the resource. Sportsmen and women are the earliest and still the most important conservationists that have ever been out there, and so always feel like we're operating from the high ground morally, and so. But yeah, that's 100% right.
Taylor, can you speak to some of the current stuff we're working on, you and the team are working on at the federal level as it concerns forest management and health, and kind of the more forward-looking policy that we're involved in?
Yeah, sure. One of those first and foremost is a bill known as the Fix Our Forest Act, which, if passed, would be the largest and most comprehensive forest management bill to arguably ever pass Congress, certainly within the last 3 to 4 decades. And some of the big things and big priorities in there for us at CSF are: one would be reducing litigation and trying to reform some of that. So if you go take your steel chainsaw to a tree, if you're a forester, you're not going to get immediately sued for doing so, right? You can go in there with skidders and a logging truck and remove some of that timber out and not have to worry about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to push back against a environmental organization who's suing you for that project. So that's a really big one for us, but also just incentivizing active forest management in terms of allowing companies and giving them flexibility to go in and clear some of that fuel load out from the forest, to go in and clear some of the standing trees that need to be removed, with the goal of ultimately the bill's primarily being pushed for to reduce wildfires across the
Mhm.
country. But obviously all of these all of these practices benefit everything that we all care about here on this podcast, being hunting, fishing, and opportunities to hear a turkey gobbler, see, bust a covey of quail, right? All of these things are tied to that. Another one that we're working on is something known as the Cottonwood decision. I won't get into all of that because it's a super wonky issue. I'm sure that John has covered it in the past as our forestry lead, but essentially this is just another roadblock that the environmental organizations have put up to protect or prevent active forest management. And it is held entirely on a court decision out of the Ninth Circuit that we view as frankly incorrect. And that it has bipartisan support to overturn it. The Obama administration, the Trump administration, believe the Biden administration, and the current Trump administration also have supported overturning the Cottonwood decision. But it ultimately needs to go through the United States Congress to overturn that decision so that it's not continue to be held up. But essentially, if you live in states within the Ninth Circuit, you largely can't do any active management on federal lands because you will get sued because of this court case. So those are a couple of things that we're working on. But one of the biggest things that we're working on is just educating
Mm.
members of Congress and state legislators. To your point, you mentioned Lorax and Smokey the Bear. And if you go in and tell somebody, hey, Smokey the Bear was actually terrible for forest health, and their eyes kind of light up and you explain it to them and they say, oh, wow, okay, I get it now. But you have, where Jeff kind of talked about earlier, people not being as close to the land and connected to the land as they were. That's a big issue we're dealing with. So just getting out there and showing people, what active forest management really is, and this is not your granddaddy's logging operation, from the early 1900s where they would clear cut areas. It is not that. So education is front and center on everything that we do, certainly on forest management.
It's an interesting thing to think about as I was listening to you speak is, the connectivity to the land has changed in decades, and then the social dynamic has also changed just since COVID, where people were moving all over the country to get the best experience in life, whatever they thought that was, and their motivations. And with that, they brought their own philosophies, their own life experiences into parts of the country where if you're not from there, you definitely don't get it. And you talk about a separation of understanding what's on the ground there, never mind the local colloquialisms and how things get done for our community. And then that leads into policy making by the ballot, by voting, by the people they put in power, even transplants, getting into seats of power, and they don't have a full appreciation for that community. That really upends a lot of stuff. And particularly I think of the West and wildfire and water resources and BLM land and kind of the lightning rod that can become. So when you talk about education and advocacy from the federal level to the state level and our team spread across the country, it is, I'll echo your thoughts, just incredibly important and make sure we're updating people as they're immigrating to different states because that's, a lot of this stuff is getting done in folks' backyards.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And how do you have people in the United States Congress that represent from California to Washington to New York to Texas to Montana, Minnesota, right? How can you get all of these people from such different backgrounds and experiences to agree on one issue, right? And I think it's interesting when you look at how this stuff actually gets done. It gets done because it's bipartisan, and it gets done because it's uniquely American opportunities. And for us, as we're working on the Hunt Fish 250 campaign, it's really, I think it's important for us to recognize how uniquely American these opportunities are and how fortunate we are to have been born in this country and to have public lands, to be talking about the things that we're talking about, right? And yes, these are very real challenges and very real threats that we have to deal with, but how fortunate it is that we get to talk about these things where other countries don't even have the opportunity to talk about this because they don't have hunting and fishing opportunities. But yeah, going back to how this stuff gets done, I think that's really important. And a family of four can't agree on a place to stop for lunch, but we are able to work with members of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus and rally them all behind one common thread, and that is access to the great outdoors. And that's a really special place, I think, for all of us on this podcast to be, and certainly something that I'm very fortunate and lucky to have in my life.
Jeff, thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm just 100% right. But you also look at it with the crisis of mental health, physical health in this country, obesity and things like that, and what the great outdoors offers as a resource physically and mentally to be able to balance things. We didn't have all of that going back. I feel like we're putting me into a time capsule here, but going back to my days, we didn't have all these other distractions. There was certainly none of this electronic stuff, and so you had to create ways to enjoy yourselves and entertain yourselves. And the outdoors was a place where your mom would kick you out of the house and say, go outside, just get out of the house. And, away you'd go. And I just submit that the more we can connect back to getting people outside and the regenerative, rejuvenating type things that nature offers. I mean, hunters and anglers have known that, but I think the American public at large needs to take a better look of what the outdoors offers. And certainly if there's an opportunity to engage in that and utilize that as we do, and we're talking about stuff in the policy arena, we certainly try to make those points.
So this whole line of thought is a great segue into why access to the outdoors doesn't happen by accident.
And again, this idea of we have we've evolved so much and we have all this great technology to help us to help with access, but at the same time, that double-edged sword has distracted, like you just said, Jeff, a whole generation or two, or maybe three, to not being so proactive. So we don't have the participation we used to, um, structurally um, in our local communities. It's not, kids aren't riding around with shotguns in their back of their trucks. They're not running out with a 22 squirrel hunting off their BMX bikes right after school or before school. So because of that decreased participation, we have to be proactive in what we do to make sure that that access continues. Can Jeff, I'll start with you and speak on that. How this stuff is very purposeful, especially in 2026 as we celebrate 250 years.
So we've been talking, the whole program's been about access, and access is physical access to be able to get onto a piece of property or a piece of body of water and utilize it. Access is also a mental thing, just like we're just talking about, and that ability to sort of change the focus. And again, little redundantly stated, but working on things like at the state level to push hunter education and outdoor education into the school system to remind people that there is this great outdoors, and try to bring a trend of people at least getting outside. And kudos to those folks that run the outdoor camps and things like that to try to encourage kids, especially those that might not otherwise be exposed to the outdoors, to see that. But it's a one of our great challenges, I think, and having lived through it and watching it. Technology is a wonderful thing, and we all need it and take advantage of it, but it's got its downsides too. And again, it's where we have to focus on this broader picture of what does access mean, and access is also encouraging people to unplug and step back outside, because you'd be amazed.
Taylor?
And Fred, if I could add on to that, I think agree with everything that Jeff said. I also look at access as conservation, right? And yes, access is many things to many different people depending on when, where, and how you recreate. But for us, we wanted to get up at 2:30 in the morning and drive 2 hours to go chase turkeys if there weren't healthy populations of turkeys, right?
Mhm.
So every access is critical, but conservation is central to everything that we do, right? And so we spend all this time on access, but we also spend every single ounce of energy we have, an extra dollar we get if you're a private landowner that cares about wildlife, on conservation, because we need healthy populations of fish and wildlife to enjoy what we do, right? And you sit down in the turkey woods, what's argue one of the first birds you hear is a whippoorwill going, and then you start to hear the cardinals going, right? And that's what makes a turkey part of what makes a turkey hunt so special. So it's not just focusing on these game species and everything else, but it's also the other species that you see while you're out in the field or on the water. And again, conservation, without that, without being able to provide that opportunity for a young kid to hear a turkey gobble hard at 50 yards, we're not going to be able to recruit that next generation and get them out enjoying the experiences that we all enjoy here.
We compete for so much in our daily lives. And, when you put our issues in perspective with just the amount of noise that happens in the world, it's important to us. We do this stuff every day, and it's important to the people we work with and the families we have, and, our community, if you will. So when I say we compete, our story is so important. I feel like it often is the little guy in the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, right? The actual wizard. Like, we want to tell this great big story, but large part, a lot of this stuff gets done behind the curtain, behind the scenes. How do we become the big wizard and project our large voice in this sea of information and just so much happening? Like, I remember when 9/11 happened, the what's it? It's a Karen, right? It's what the Chiron at the bottom, the scroll. Like, that wasn't a thing until 2001. It's just scroll, 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 information, information, 24 news cycle. It's just so spastic. And now people can't get an attention span more than 45 seconds or less. And we talk about this program is how do we tell this great story and compete in that space? But that's part of protecting opportunity. That's part of how this stuff doesn't happen on accident. How do we continue to project and tell people what that goes on behind the scenes? Jeff, I'll let you take that.
No, geez, you're picking the dinosaur to talk about how we do this. Come on, man. Yeah, redundantly stated it. There has to be a movement, if you will, back to connecting with the outdoors, and that's way broader than just certainly CSF or even our community. For all the reasons we've already discussed. The technology stuff that you just talked about, the attention span, the not willing to get dirty or wet or go outside. Hopefully that pendulum, like often is the case, swings, and maybe it's time that swings back, and we're doing our part in our niche role at CSF to continue to encourage that at multiple levels and layers. And so but man, if I had the answer to that, Fred, I think we'd be all chasing it. So I'll let the younger guy here talk about his views on answering that question.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we in the conservation sportsman's community are our worst enemy. And we don't take time to celebrate the wins. We only focus on the negatives and the next threat. And that's not always a bad thing. At the same time, we don't ever slow down enough to sit back and realize that we have a lot of great opportunities here in this country and we should be celebrating those things. We need to tell that story more. I think, for us to be able to, we're not going to be able to get that kid to put down his cell phone and get into the woods and thoroughly enjoy it unless we're actually bringing them with us, right? Not just sitting there talking to them about it, but saying, let's go. And maybe they can bring their cell phone or Game Boy or PlayStation portable with them while they're in the woods. If that's how we can get them out there and they can hear that a first turkey gobble in the morning, I think their perspective is going to change a little bit. But it's also, I think, so I say that to say, I think it's important for us to recognize that kids aren't as eager as they used to be to get out into the outdoors, and maybe we have to meet them where they are a little bit rather than constantly trying to drag everybody to where we are. But I'm also not the marketing person, and I'm the furthest thing from creative or trendy.
So that wasn't fair of me. I probably should have dialed that in a bit more and led with what can we do through policy? What can we do with our partners, state agency, federal agencies that are local, and partnering with them. And this kind of will lead into our final line of thought is our role in protecting opportunity through policy, through good policy. There's we've covered so much in the prior episode, this episode now up to this last part. We have opportunities to connect with all the cohorts and the coalitions we've built over the years, and we continue to build. What policy that we have become proactive in our organization through that? What can we continue to do?
Stay
I'll
the
start
course.
since Jeff has started the last couple times.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
I think it all goes back to education. Again, there are, much like society, Congress is a representation of society, right? And much like society has started to transition away from enjoying the outdoors, members of Congress have as well. So it's really important for us to get out and show those people what breaking the clay feels like. We just hosted a clays event last week for members of Congress, and you have Republicans and Democrats together enjoying time outside breaking clays, and some members of Congress that have never shot a shotgun before or hit a clay, right? And for them to feel that is really important. But that's not just feel good stuff, that's education. And they're getting a real life education on stuff. So I think it all goes back to educating members of Congress, state agencies, state legislators, governors about not only why this is important for mental health, why this is important for local economies, but again, why it's uniquely American, why we need to continue to perpetuate hunting, fishing, trapping, and recreational shooting now and into the future. But I think education is everything that we need to continue focusing on.
and before Taylor started, I would just say, stay the course for CSF. We've been averaging 200 policy wins per year for pushing a decade right now. So this bipartisan approach, this idea that don't be confrontational, educate, to Taylor's point. Talk about the positives, is continuing to gain traction, and where in today's really partisan political climate, we have the opportunity to deliver wins for America, Hunt Fish 250, but also for both political parties. So we've got a pretty good recipe, and we just need to, stay on top of it and keep doing what we're doing, because it's yielding the kinds of results that we all ought to be proud of. And you know, things are fairly, there's great opportunities. When I was a kid, there were no turkeys on the eastern shore of Maryland. White-tailed deer, compared to populations, compared to what they are today, were vastly smaller. So, we tend to look at the negatives, to Taylor's point and your point, Fred. Let's look at the positives. There are great opportunities out here, and we just need to get more people to realize how important stepping outside really is.
We've spent a lot of time talking about two of the three-legged stool that we work with and service, and we haven't really touched on the governors. And in the closing minutes here, I think about influencers today, and that term gets used very, very loosely and sometimes not accurately given to the right people. But with our members, with the people we service and we work with, uh, general public does look to elected officials as leaders, and they can be influential. So, I think back to a Paul Ryan drawing a compound bow in his office. I think to Antonin Scalia sitting behind a turkey fan, and so many others. And, we have a bipartisan bench, almost 30 governors in our Governor Sportsman's Caucus, with Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, and then Governor in Montana.
Ian Forte.
Ian Forte, thank you for having my back, Jeff. So both of these gentlemen, Montana for sure, and Governor Shapiro maybe doesn't get after it, but also recognizes the value and the tradition and heritage in that. What roles do these governors and again, these other leaders, what role do they have in exhibiting that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We take pictures, we do content curation through our own marketing, but I think it could move a needle if it's almost normalizing what is normal, if I can say it that way. It's normal to us, but for the general public that we're always talking about, the 80%, to see a politician, to see a leader drawing a bow back, going to PGC and busting clays, eventually, if they keep doing that, it becomes like, oh, that's something I want to do, and that's something that's not taboo.
Yeah, and the governors, the importance of the governors is, well, they're the head administrator for the whole state. So all the state employees for your DNR or DNR equivalent all report up to the governor. Ultimately, they, in most cases, appoint the commissions. They certainly have the ability to endorse or veto legislation. So they're a critical component to this, and why we created a bipartisan Governor's Sportsmen's Caucus. But yeah, I mean, I would love to just, the more people we can bring that do have influence at the federal or the state level into this educational fold, and realize that the way CSF goes about it is to build consensus, to build a bigger tent, to bring people and be inviting, is something that I know I'm proud of, and both of you guys are, because we do it better than anybody else, and that's what leads to these successes. And so that's kind of my final thought is, the sportsman's world, the conservation world, the natural world has never been defined by a partisan label, and if we approach it without those partisan labels, it's showing how we can win.
Taylor?
Yeah, I would say, generally speaking, then I'll get to your actual question, Fred, but I'll piggyback off of Jeff a little bit here. When people ask me what my favorite part of the job is, I think people are often surprised to hear my answer. My answer is bipartisanship. Because, and the reason that it's my favorite thing is sure, I love protecting the way of life that we all love here, but to see people from such different backgrounds and such different walks of life come together on one common thread is a really special place to be. And I have, very near and dear friends that are on both sides of the aisle that work on Capitol Hill, and we get together on the weekends and we go hunting and fishing. We don't talk about anything else other than hunting and fishing, and how special of a place is that for us as an organization to be. But to your question on the governor's caucus, as Jeff mentioned, they are the administrators for the state, and it is their job to represent all of the constituencies and voters in their respective states. And at the end of the day, the state agencies report up to them, as Jeff mentioned. And that's not to say that we want state agencies to become a polarized or a political thing, but at the same time, public opinion does matter when it comes to conservation, when it comes to hunting and fishing opportunities. And it's important for the governors to be aware of what's going on. So for us, it's really important to be able to continue to be that voice for the governors. And as Jeff mentioned, there's no other organization out there that has that direct connection to the governors like CSF does. And it's very unique for us.
Gentlemen, we're getting up against it. I want to thank you both for your time and your thoughts, the energy. Really appreciate this particular program. Would be a good 250th anniversary show if I didn't ask you to kind of look into your crystal ball. And where none of us will be here for the next 250, but God willing, this country will, and everything we've laid the foundation for will. What would your great grandchildren want to have? What would you want for them as we go forward and live this life, Jeff?
To have the opportunities to go outdoors and enjoy what nature has provided for the last 250 is still there for them for the next 250. Would sum it up probably as best as I could.
Taylor?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Beyond that, I think, just to make it a little bit more specific, for my great whatever grandkids to be able to sit in a duck blind with their buddies. And, even if the ducks aren't flying, to be able to, cook some eggs on the skillet, to hear a turkey gobble on the roost, to feel a fishbowl on the other end of the line, and not have to worry about whether they're going to be able to hunt or fish tomorrow. But they know that they have the opportunity to do so because of the work and the groundwork that we're laying here today at CSF and ensuring that we can protect it into perpetuity.
You guys both hit on it multiple times. This is a unique system. This is a set of opportunities that are unique to nowhere else on this planet. And you hope that it continues to do that. We've come so far since the founding, and look where we're at today. And I can only hope that that swing continues and this stuff is protected in perpetuity, and our great nation continues to stand for 500. And we'll be looking down hopefully and celebrating right along with them. Jeff, Taylor, thank you so much for your time and your leadership, and we'll look forward to celebrating throughout the summer. And we continue with our program here in this series for Hunt Fish 250. And folks, remember, for 250 years, sportsmen and women have shaped America. CSF ensures they always will. We'll see you guys on the next show. Make sure you tune in. Go check out the other podcasts, great history lesson and just current stuff. And we thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. So long.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.